Steve Sheppard was exploration manager at Calidus. He made the first discovery worldwide using detector, and so I invited Steve to come in and just talk about the discovery process and how much time it saved them, and just talk you through. So unfortunately, Calidus was a victim of one of the banks, amongst other things. And
yes, yeah. Hence the new ASX ticker RIP for Calidus.
And with our hand off to Steve, more than once, I suspect.
I thought I'd just leave this as it is with all the Calidus brand. Moved on to Westar, which is interesting to hear Todd's description of portable PPB being a small company with 26 employees, which makes it about 26 times larger than Westar. But anyway, yeah, what I'll just go through, I gave a talk based on this about 18 months ago, which was more about the discovery process. So I've tweaked it a little bit, but a lot of it I've left as it was, because I think now that I no longer have access to emails and things from Calidus, of course, that there would be a tendency to revise things and make things look prettier than what they actually were. So this is Felix the cat, for anybody who's under the age of about 55 and probably didn't grow up watching that while they had their afternoon tea after school or something. So Felix had his bag of tricks, and I suppose portable PPB was one that we employed. Felix is the name of the discovery made with this. Calidus means hot or fiery in Latin, and Felix means happy. And so we stuck with the Latin theme, and for a while that was our happy place. Paul Morris, ex-GSWA chief geochemist, he put together an article in Explore magazine a couple of years ago, so have a look at that for the sort of the details. I'll stick away from that, but you can have a look at that. We certainly could have made better use of the technologies as we go through, but our exploration programs were constrained by a rather changeable and capricious corporate environment, which didn't help things. So if anybody asks you to go and explore in the Mosquito Creek Basin, then it's a little bit like freedom or crucifixion, and your first question should be, is there someone I could speak to about this? Not the easiest place to explore, and it's been a bit of a graveyard for a number of companies. We're in the East Pilbara. This is where the tenement was here, just east of Nullagine, about 10 k's or so. Late Archean, same age, Mallina Basin up in the West Pilbara, but the Mallina Basin has all sorts of goodies like atakites and bonanitic-like rocks, which are absent from Mosquito Creek. Essentially a turbidite succession, quite monotonous. Up to about 2008 it had yielded about 42 tonnes of gold, so it's not inconsiderable. Generally gold in narrow veins is the story. And there are two main mineralised lines. There's a Middle Creek line, which is gold only, and the Blue Speck line, which is gold and antimony. And antimony used to be a really dirty word, but now, hey, it's a critical metal, so we love it. These yellow dots here are all of the Mindex occurrences from the WA database. These two here are the new additions from our discovery. So you can see that the first odd thing about this is the fact that we have discoveries right along that line, and then they suddenly stop at this tenement boundary. In September 2020, Calidus decided to acquire the Blue Speck mine, gold antimony. You can see the production there. December 2020, we announced a farm in on this tenement to the west of that line. Straddles one of the two main mineralised structures in the basin. Not a single drill hole in it, which struck us as rather odd, and it's nice to go and drill somewhere where nobody has drilled before. The geology manager at the time, Jane Allen, said it was a mate of the MD's that this deal was done through, whereas the MD, Dave, swore absolutely not and said it was just some random dude that he cold called. But anyway, the information came on to me. We thought it looked good, but the existing rock chip sampling was discouraging is a good word for it. Disgusting would be a better word, I suppose. But again, no drilling, no prospecting, no soil or stream sediment sampling, which was just really weird. There were a couple of people told us that, oh no, there'll be workings there, you just haven't found them yet. There are none. No tracks, nothing. Really quite odd. Who held the ground previously? So sort of ties in with what Todd was talking about with a number of people that have held ground before. But the area that's covered by that tenement, this is the current sort of tenement there, but been held by 5 different companies over quite a period, 14, 15 years. And there was one company who'd had the tenement before and then decided to re-peg it in 2016. And that was the company that we did the deal with in 2020. So what next? Early 2021 we decided to farm into another tenement, the blue one over there. So we had an interest in 2 ELs in a basin in which we were basically newbies. We're very familiar with the greenstone belts and, you know, alteration indicators and all the rest of it there, but not in this sort of turbidite belt. So we actually used the 2 tenements initially as a bit of a compare and contrast exercise. And then the first trip we did out to that E46 1026 was basically enough to make a grown man weep. We walked over a bit of the stuff along this main blue spec line here and basically didn't see a single vein, no obvious signs of alteration and so on. And my main thought at that stage was, God, I'm glad we didn't pay too much for this tenement. In 2006, the blue samples, there were 13 rock chips taken. And then in 2016, there was another 55 rock chips taken. I think that was from the same company, including 20 from quartz veins and quartz vein siltstones and sandstones. And you can see there's only 1 rock chip sample that returned greater than 0.1 grams per tonne. So you can see why there was some weeping and gnashing of teeth and what have you. And you can see these tracks here. These are the tracks we subsequently put in for the drilling program, and they had sampled areas including right next to drill pads that we drilled from and so on. No soil or stream sediment samples. The areas dominated by ridges and sort of valleys, skeletal soils on the slopes, and then down in the valleys you've got sort of proximal to distal colluvium sandy material derived from the material underneath or just immediately upslope. So a good area to do soil sampling. But again, you know, you thought surely without all of that you would hit something mineralised. So despite those crappy rock chip results, we had Westar Resources identified paragonite alteration around quite a few of the structures there. This is the hyperspectral data, so there's red, the high paragonite values. And you can see they've got it up around the blue spec and gold spec mines. We had quite a wide belt of alteration apparently down that way, but something that wasn't obvious at all as you mapped it. So we weren't sure whether we were looking for a whole set of sort of narrow veins that would explain that width, or whether we were actually looking at a blind deposit and how we were going to deal with that. Because the fact that there were no workings at all, we wondered whether the alteration might be exposed, but not the actual sort of gold-bearing veins. So then we got to the point where we got distracted by the DFS drilling because the mine geos couldn't seem to manage a drilling program at Blue Spec. So we got pulled off onto that. So then we brought in Paul Morris to design the stream sediment program while we were busy with other things. The samples were collected in mid-2021. The results didn't come back till I think it was November or early December from a laboratory that I won't name, but who I've never used again. And it turns out that they had analysed the wrong size fraction and hadn't fessed up to it, and just delayed us until we eventually got it out of them. So, and once we finally got the stream sediment results, we had 24 bunch of samples that came back at greater than 24 sort of ppb, all clustered around the blue spec fault zone, which made sense. And some of the values that we got out of the stream sediments were higher than any of the rock chip samples that have been taken. So it's like, you know, go figure. early 2022, we looked at the blue spec sort of pit along strike to see what lessons we could learn from there. We thought maybe there's sort of a series of narrow veins that have been missed by earlier explorers. So we had a look in the pit, and one thing that stood out was the proximal anchorite. And then Nicholas Merrio, who's now at the CET, recognised the hematite alteration. And once you see the purple and you notice it and it's pointed out to you, you can't unsee it. But there was no mention of it all in the earlier work. So we then went back to that tenement to the west, and of course the anchorite and hematite corridors were mapped. They stood out like the proverbials, but we just hadn't recognised them for what they were earlier. In late 2021, we signed up as a sponsor of Portable PPB. I think we were the very last one, roughly. There was one spot left. I'd looked at this in about 2019 and tried to contact CSIRO through their website and didn't have much luck there. And it was only a random meeting with some people who said, oh yeah, we know the people. So we ended up coming on board. We selected 3 areas of soil sampling based on the stream sediment results. So that's the areas there in black, predominantly around this blue speck zone here, but also another one to the north and an area down there. So we did an orientation survey. It looked like less than 180 micron fraction worked best for us. It was that compromise between what could be sieved in the field in a realistic amount of time versus the ideal sort of fraction. So we were delayed for a little while with several rain events, but we finally got underway in June, and we used the detector process for the whole sort of soil sampling program. So just a couple of days, so we discarded the top 5 to 10 centimetres of soil at each site, collected about 400 grams of material. We were analysing 250 grams at that stage, and we had about 150 left over for other purposes. And we carried out the preparation analysis up at Marble Bar, where we had our exploration base. So we were driving down about every second day to pick up the samples and go back up to Marble Bar. It's about a 3 to 4 hour round trip, but we just sort of cycled through the staff doing that. We had some trial and error and troubleshooting involved in that. It was probably fairly early days, and I'm surprised that Wade still looks as young as he does, given all of the grief we gave him. And we discovered some things. We had a batch of samples where we had very low values to begin with, and we thought there might have been a problem with the glicks because we'd just changed the batch of the glicks, and did a bit of troubleshooting with the guys down here, and eventually worked out that maybe the samples weren't dry enough. They appeared to be dry, but even in Marble Bar in sort of July, August time, you weren't getting the samples dry. So I think that was when things started to move to this food dehydrator to make sure that they were properly dry. So we did re-dry them and then reanalyse them and got the sort of results we were expecting. But if nothing goes wrong, I don't think you don't learn anything anyway. So we analysed this from west to east for no good reason other than, in fact, these were probably logistically the more difficult samples to collect. And so we thought people are more enthusiastic at the start of a sampling program than they are at the end. So, and it did work well. We plotted the results daily in the Perth office as they came through. Commonly very excited fieldies and geos, you'd get an email with the results and then a phone call saying, you've got to have a look at this, you've got to have a look at this, which is a real contrast to the way fieldies normally sort of react to sampling programs. And we were able to do infill samples and collect those while the crew was still in the field as well. So we ended up extending the time that the crew was in the field by a week or 10 days to collect infill lines. We got a peak result there about 922. Not sure if I'm allowed to call them PPB or DU. And again, the anomalous values coincided very strongly with mapped structures and alteration corridors. And what was really nice about it, working this way, was that we could actually see those zones. It was like rolling something out, like a carpet or something with a nice pattern on it. and you could start to see where the pattern sort of emerged as you rolled that out to the east. I find that exciting anyway. So we got high gold in soil values returned from areas where the rock chip sampling had earlier shown absolutely nothing. And that's these black dots here, and there are actually black dots in here that are covered by those high values there. So you would have had to work hard to actually miss it all, really, because subsequently when we went back and did the rock chip sampling, we were getting values of 6, 7, 8 grams per tonne out of some of the quartz veins. Much greater width of anomalous sort of values than we'd expected. We're expecting this to be quite a tight system like you have at Blue Spec further to the east, but these zones were quite wide. But by that stage it was about, I think it was about early August in 2022 when we completed this. And I think this was the first ASX release reporting the portable PPB results. So we had quite a lot of toing and froing back between the guys at Portable PPB and us to make sure that we didn't have any grounds on which it could be challenged by the ASX, and to make it watertight, which you've seen to have done because we had no queries or please explains from them. And then we lodged the PAW, that was approved, the heritage survey was completed. We managed to get a window there with the heritage survey before the summer season started. If we hadn't done the portable PPB and we're waiting for the lab results, then we would have had to have waited until about March or April the following year to get the heritage survey done. So we were sort of 6 months ahead of the game, sort of straight out the gate. And then we had the drilling completed before the end of October, and if anybody's worked up around Nullagine and Marble Bay, you really don't want to be up there sort of November, December and what have you. And the rains come in as well, which pretty much puts a stop to a lot of activities. So the fact that we were able to get all of the drilling completed before the wet season started was a real bonus. Initial drilling program, the holes are shown in white there. Some challenging topography, so we had to end up using a grade control rig to get the reach across some of these zones. A mix of drilling to the north and south. We felt from the mapping that it was probably dipping steeply to the south, the zones there, but you couldn't always get where you wanted to actually be. So we did 19 shallow holes, and we expanded that another 12 holes. We actually had to send some samples off to the lab, rush assays. This was definitely one area where if we were doing it again, I would have done the assays on those holes with the portable PPB if we'd had the staff, and we would have had the answer back even quicker than that. And we probably would have drilled a few more holes, I think, than what we did in places where we didn't have the rush assays.
How long do you have to wait for your assays in the lab?
The rush ones, or geez, I can't remember now, not having access to the emails, but I think it was about 2 to 3 weeks, something like that. So yeah, it was a fairly busy time at the labs at the time, but yeah, it definitely would have been nice to have selected more material from some of the holes, put through a selection of what we thought were mineralised intervals and sent those off. One of the things that we found, say here, was that there was all the indications with sericite carbonate alteration, disseminated pyrite, but we had no idea if we were dealing with sort of like 0.1 ppm or 10, and that's where Detect Ore would have really helped us a bit in just shortening that and being able to make some better decisions on some other areas we would like to have drilled. But that was one of the lessons we learnt. We were a very small crew at the time and didn't have the capacity to actually run the drill samples. C'est la vie. The 2 holes that we did send off came from this area here, Felix West, and you can see they're about 41 metres at 2.4, which we were pretty happy with. That was pretty solid. And then those other couple of intercepts there, and that was just the first 2 holes. So we did a second drilling program, February 2023, based on all those results. Mainly over at Felix East, the idea from the MD was, and this is the problem when you let engineers be geos, Can we define a material for a test pit? So it was a nice idea, but it didn't quite work out. But what we did do, and you can see from the cross sections there, we actually got a better idea of what the geometry of the mineralisation was, which was handy. So, happy or unhappy? We'd certainly discovered mineralisation in healthy amounts. Then our exploration budget was cut just as the drill rigs were heading to site to do the follow-up drilling. Thanks, Macquarie. We had no money for drilling for 2023, so we had to go back to low-cost activities. What do? Let's go soil sampling. And what we were able to do with the detector, using that again, was actually to much sort of better pin down the mineralised structures. And although overall the structures were heading in that sort of east-northeast direction, it turns out that some of the better mineralised structures were actually running east-west. There were these oblique structures that were linking structures between two of the main shear zones. So on the basis of that, we actually were able to sort of turn our planned holes around and more precisely sort of define those structures. We were able to generate some new targets and tidied up quite a few things like point anomalies. And that would have worked beautifully if we'd been able to get the money to drill later on in that year, because again, we could have had all of that drilling done before the wet season hit us again. The soil sampling in July 2023, when we tightened these things up, we got a peak value of about 4.5 sort of ppm. So we further defined those oblique structures, and we certainly did define areas sort of better strike continuity. We were able to prioritise some of our drill targets. How good is portable PPB, eh? As Scotty might say. At Felix, the POW was approved, the Heritage Survey completed, drilling program done before the end of the wet season. So that, as I say, that was 6 months ahead of where we would have been otherwise. The initial drilling program, 31 holes, was done by the time of selection of the soil results from the laboratory were actually returned. But it also did save us a lot of money in terms of what we submitted to the laboratory. And we were able to just take out, I think it was about 25% of the samples from there that we sent off to the laboratory for sort of multi-element geochemistry and the fire assay. A lot less than we might have done otherwise, and enough samples to tell us what we needed to know. At Blue Spec, we also used detector on some drill samples. It was the first indication we had that the gold from those drill holes was refractory, which turned out again to be a very useful piece of information in terms of planning and where you were going to put that gold. It clearly was not going to go through the mill at Warrawoona. For the soils, the comparison with the fire assay, 50 gram charge indicated we were getting about 60% of the gold liberated. But you know, the results really were excellent and fit for purpose, and, you know, enabling us to make decisions. So we started using the technique as a rapid reconnaissance screening tool closer up to Marble Bar and the greenstone belts there, and rapidly sort of dispose of a number of targets and generate some others for drilling. Another benefit was the considerable buy-in that we had from the field assistants. You know, normally when you've got a soil sampling program coming up, the field assistants, it's like telling them to eat their vegetables, and mainly sort of collie and Brussels sprouts at that. So it was kind of like telling them they could have their lollies and bugger the vegetables, because they were collecting the samples and then they were actually running them through detect ore on site. So they actually had a stake in what was being collected and what was being assayed. They were also operating the Vanta as well, and they really did take a lot of care with what they were doing. So they weren't just sort of, I guess, being treated as sample mules. There was also a palpable sense of excitement. You know, when you're seeing these things actually unfold almost in real time, there's really nothing quite like it. And then you've got, you know, MDs and other people wandering to office wanting to see all of the colours, the pretty colours on QGIS as you're plotting everything up. So yeah, and being able to see those targets swiftly tested and either rejected or refined. And postscript to all this, of course, with the exploration funding being pulled, we weren't able to follow up and drill. I still don't think it has been drilled. But is it a small deposit or the top of something bigger? And flying back from site one day, I read this paper that Alison Ord and Bruce Hobbs had sort of published in 2023 about using the probability distributions of assays and mineral abundances to look at the discriminate between sort of high value deposits and sub-economic deposits. So we approached them and asked them if they'd like to test the data set. So you can use not just assays, but you can use hyperspectral data for that as well, the numerical values. And they said it appeared to be a moderately well endowed system. And that's where it lies at the moment, still to be followed up on. End of story.
Thank you, Steve.
I don't know, you stick this on or...
Anyone, questions for Steve? Yeah, how did you find the use of the coarser fractions? You said the -80 mesh was the best, and you obviously did some orientation work using the coarser fractions. How much of a discrepancy was it?
If I could access my Calidus emails, I could tell you. I don't know. I can't remember.
We've still got that data.
Yeah.
It was marginally better.
Yeah.
But,
Is that right? So,
yeah.
Okay. That's
Yeah, it
encouraging.
wasn't a massive.
Yeah.
Wasn't a massive difference.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
But in skeletal, I think it was more spotty was the difference.
Yes.
It's
That's
still
right,
found
yeah.
anomalies, but it was more erratic with the coarser fraction.
Okay.
It's would have been 6 hour leaches as well. Okay.
That's right. Yes. That's
Yeah.
right. Actually. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of what we were doing, I've got no idea how it compares now to exactly how the process is being run. Yeah. Thanks to us, I'm sure.
It's even better now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So of course the fraction with a longer leach time to overcome some of
Yeah.
those problems.
Yep.
Were there any lessons with the paragonite and the depth of weathering, or would you have learned something about the refractory character if you could have got some of the other elements out of your Vanta?
Well, interestingly enough, we were expecting to get a lot of high antimony values because of the nature of blue spec just up the road. But the funny thing about blue spec and gold spec is they're only about 1 kilometre apart. One is gold only and free milling, the other is gold and antimony and refractory. The antimony values that we got weren't particularly high, they were much lower than we'd expected. And we did actually run some of the samples, I think, from the holes. And yeah, we found that the upper portion, the oxidized material was mostly okay, but once you got down below into the sulfide material, you're looking at refractory gold. But yeah, certainly the hyperspectral data was a good indication of where the best sort of mineralised parts were. Although, of course, the alteration halo was wider than your actual mineralised veins.